Many deer hunters dream about hunting in states like Iowa and Kansas, and it's easy to understand why. There's a lot of sunlight reaching the ground, and that means production crops are growing, there's a lot of groceries, there's also some great native habitat that offers both cover and food. Those type of habitats are very productive. There's a lot of groceries, and deer can grow some nice antlers. On top of all that, the habitat is very hunter friendly. There's a lot of bottlenecks, and if you can find a limited resource in a bottleneck or pinch point, you're probably going to see a lot of deer, including some nice bucks. Team member Micajah Goins lives and hunts in central Kansas, and he's tagged a lot of venison, including some nice bucks. This past summer, Micajah received permission to hunt a new property. Who doesn't enjoy hunting a new property? You never know what's going to show up. So Micajah got a Moultrie mobile set up to start taking inventory to see what's in the area.
All right, I just put a Moultrie mobile right here on the edge of this field. This is my first time coming to this new place that I got permission to.
Just a few days after getting the Moultrie set up, he started seeing some nice bucks. You can bet Micajah was excited for season to start. He was shooting that morel target and getting ready for that moment when venison stepped in range. The farm Micajah was hunting had been planted with late beans. They were double cropping with wheat and soybeans. And due to the drought this summer, those soybeans didn't get very tall. Micajah knew there was enough sunlight reaching the ground, and it was the perfect situation for him to broadcast Green Cover Seeds Hidey Hole Broadcast Blend. There would be enough sunlight for that seed to germinate and grow beneath the beans.
Well, it's the last day of September, and we got rain in the forecast. We have had a super dry summer. We're in a D4 drought here in this part of Kansas. So I've got the Hidey Hole blend. I'm only going to do about an acre. I'm going to broadcast over these beans. Normally I would wait until they started to get yellow, but they're so short and there's enough sunlight getting between each bean that any seed that gets good contact with the soil and gets some water on it ought to germinate and start growing.
In these situations, this can be a great food plot strategy. Hunters get both those standing grains and the greens below. On the warm days, deer tend to favor the greens, and on those colder days, deer hit the pods. You got the best of both worlds. Micajah only broadcast a small portion of this field, right in one corner within range of a new stand he just hung. Based on the sign he'd found, Micajah knew deer like to enter the field in this corner, and having a food source right there would have them hit those breaks and be within bow range. During the afternoon of November 10th, Micajah had a favorable wind to hunt his new stand. Micajah hadn't been hunting long when a nice buck stepped out across the field. This buck stopped and he worked a couple rubs along the edge of the field. Remember, it's November 10th. The peak of the rut is just a few days away. This buck is obviously more interested in finding a receptive doe than he is feeding in the field. Earlier we mentioned travel corridors or pinch points in this type of habitat. And you'll notice this buck is cruising right along the edge of the timber between fields. Let's take that one step further. This buck is going right along the edge of the field, but the wind is coming from the north, from the timber. So the wind's blowing out to the buck. He's cutting across that wind, scent checking the cover or the timber to the north while visually scanning the field. He's covering a lot of acres quickly during the rut. In addition, there's several scrapes around this field edge, and that buck can also check those scrapes. Watch carefully as this buck slows down and turns and actually stops at a scrape. You'll notice he doesn't actively work the scrape, but he's downwind of that scrape. He's definitely taking in scent that was left at the scrape by other deer. Remember, scrapes are a communication hub. As we get close to the peak of the rut, scrape activity may die, and that's because bucks aren't needing to deposit or gather scent quite as much. Rather, it's more effective for them just to cut a trail to find a receptive doe. But it's interesting, he slows down at this scrape. This buck is walking right along the edge of the field, heading towards Micajah. And as Micajah's watching this buck, he realizes a doe steps out in the corner of the field. If you listen carefully, the buck gives a grunt when he sees the doe. The buck swings around behind the doe, and Micajah gets ready for the shot. Just as Micajah draws and gets ready the second time, the buck turns again. This buck's within 20 yards, and he's putting on a show.
Growing Deer is brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's. Also by Green Cover Food Plots, Winchester, Moultrie Mobile, Fleet Outdoor Apparel, Morel Targets, Fourth Arrow, Scorpion Venom Archery, Case IH Tractors, Ward Laboratories, Burris Optics, G5 Broadheads, Prime Bows, and Redneck Hunting Blinds.
Unfortunately, there's several limbs blocking the vitals, and Micajah knows it's better just to let that buck walk away than risk deflecting an arrow taking a shot. What a cool encounter. That got the blood pumping, and even more, it provided some great information for Micajah. He learned a lot about how deer, especially bucks, move through that area. You can bet Micajah was excited to get back in the tree when his schedule and the conditions allowed. 2 weeks later, during the afternoon of November 24th, Micajah was able to return to that hunting location. There was a big storm forecast to pass through the next day, and Micajah was hoping deer would come out that afternoon to feed before the storm. Sure enough, deer were definitely moving and feeding that afternoon. The neighboring properties had already harvested the beans and corn. This was the only food source, standing beans and that hidey hole broadcast blend. This was the limited resource, and wouldn't you know it, that's where the deer were. Micajah never saw a buck he wished to harvest that afternoon, but he returned the following morning.
Well, it's nice and cold this morning. Really overcast because it kind of started to spit some freezing rain. Should be turning to snow here in a little bit. I got in here clean, didn't spook anything. I don't think there's anything in the field right now as it's starting to get light. So I expect them to kind of come out here in a little bit.
This buck was grabbing a few bites of soybean pods, but he was obviously on a mission. Micajah saw a few other deer, but it wasn't the movement he was hoping for. He had some chores to do at home, so he went ahead and climbed down, snuck home for a few hours, knocked out those chores, and came back during the early afternoon right as that storm was hitting.
Well, it's about 2 o'clock and the deer are already showing up. There's a couple does just stepping into the field. I'm set up. We're gonna shoot something. If a doe comes by, I'll shoot her. I'm definitely ready for a buck too.
As Micajah was watching these deer, he saw a nice buck come out on the far end of the field. It was one of the shooter bucks he'd seen on his camera during the summer. After feeding a few minutes, this buck turned and started angling across the field towards Micajah. It looked like this buck was headed towards the timber. Micajah gave a few grunts. Unfortunately, it didn't appear that buck heard the grunt. Maybe it was because the sleet was hitting and making a lot of noise, tough to hear, but that buck stepped in the timber and Micajah had to wonder if he'd come back out. Micajah was determined to sit it out, and as the sleet turned to snow, a group of does and fawns came out. There's always room in the freezer, and Micajah grabbed the prize. That doe wasn't going far, but it was still early, and Micajah knocked another arrow, knowing a buck could step out at any time. Through the snow, Micajah spotted a familiar set of antlers. The buck was angling away, so Micajah hit the grunt call again, and this time the buck heard. If you listen closely, this buck starts grunting as he's walking towards Micajah. The shot was a bit back, and Micajah knew that deer probably needed a little time. He also knew if he went in too early and bumped that deer with the falling snow, it'd be tough to track him. So he decided the best thing to do was climb down at dark and return the next morning. It was going to be a cold night, and the meat was going to be fine, and he knew if he just was patient, he'd recover that buck.
Found him. Pretty sure he's dead. He didn't go very far.
No, not at all. Micajah returned the next morning, and he quickly found the doe just a little ways out of the plot, and the buck wasn't far from the doe. Micajah had a lot of fresh venison for his family and another set of antlers for the wall.
Well, it is the next morning. Feeling really blessed to have not only been able to harvest him, but also just the fact that he didn't end up going very far made for a quick recovery this morning. I was pretty worried, and I knew where the doe had died, and he ended up only being about 20 yards from her. This is a deer that I had a few pictures of. This is a new farm. I had pictures of him back in August when he was in velvet, and then not any more pictures since then. But just a really unique, cool buck. I love his frame. He came out about 3 o'clock yesterday and is by himself. He fed on the beans for a while. These standing beans are just a hot spot. He ended up making it into the timber. Didn't hear me grunting at him. And then as the evening progressed, more and more deer came through. I shot her, and not long after, I thought I saw a buck coming through the timber, and sure enough, he stepped back out. He was headed towards the group of does that was in the middle of the field, but I was able to grunt at him and get his attention. I'm using the G5 Dead Meat V2. Super stoked. This is a great buck to pull off a double as well. It's just another hunt that I won't forget.
Micajah's hunts provided some great lessons for hunters. It was a great illustration of how limited resources paired with a bottleneck will get deer within range. On top of that, there were some really cool observations about deer behavior during different portions of the rut. If you still have a tag in your pocket, try to find those pinch points around a food source. Food sources are probably going to be the limited resource this time of year. Many deer are back on that food cover pattern, and if you can find that pinch point going to food or from food as deer travel between food and cover, there's a good chance you could punch that late season tag. Whether you're still looking for venison or the freezer's full, I hope you slow down this week, get outside and enjoy creation, but more importantly, listen to the Creator and the purpose He has for your life. Thanks for watching Growing Deer.